Hello, and welcome to the Busa Writing God King podcast, episode 3. Today, we are continuing with a review of the path of becoming and being a Busa Writing God King. On today's agenda, we are reviewing step 4, break out of your mental prisons. Don't have obligations. Don't let yourself be manipulated. Cut out toxicity and do what you want. On today's episode, we have a special guest, as well as our original hosts. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Adam Mataway.
I'm Daniel.
I am Chris, aka dantedrackis.
And I am Stephanie.
All right, so in breaking out of your mental prisons, specifically the do not have any obligations step is something that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to people that are toxic or people that are a burden to them. Let's say specifically like someone that they're dating, right? Let's say that someone that they're dating needs financial assistance, right? That person might feel obligated to continue supporting them financially even after separating from the relationship because they know that the other person has no other support and that if they stop helping them that they're going to be homeless or that something bad's going to happen to them or whatever. So the other person might pressure them, right, into like, oh, but you can't just let me be and like all this kind of stuff and try to make them feel like a horrible person. But nobody else is your responsibility unless you have a child. All right, nobody else is your responsibility, and that's something that a lot of people struggle to understand, which I think is important because if you take on too many people as an obligation to you and you mentally think of like, oh, I'm obligated to this person, I'm obligated to that person, you can't focus on yourself or build yourself up as strongly as you would be able to if you didn't have them.
Look. I like that you make the child the exception and that generally other people are going to be adults or at least teenagers that could be responsible for themselves that you're interacting with. And the exception with the child is that the child's not capable, at least now, of being responsible for themselves or responsible for their own life. So ultimately, you are responsible for your own, and in the same way, others are responsible for themselves. Granted, circumstances are different, and you might have the ability to help somebody out, but like you said, you need to be at least aware that that person does need to be held responsible for their own life. Ultimately, like it's not just you, right? It is up to them to also take care of themselves.
And on another note, you talked about how, if you're in a relationship and you have a lover, it's also not your responsibility to be obligated to them. But what if your lives are intertwined? What if you work together? What if you live together? What if you share, insurance or something like that? Then in a literal sense, you do have obligations to one another.
I mean, in that case, it also just, because of all of these circumstances, you have to also problem solve, like in the case of you financially helping out your significant other, and let's say that they can't supply for themselves. Why is it that that person can't do it? If you care that much about that person, then you find out a way to get out of that situation as quickly as possible. But feeding into it, like that whole thing of teach a man to fish and he'll eat forever, instead of just catching fish for him. It would be in the same case scenario. Now, if you have like insurance together, or if you have a mortgage to pay together or something like that, then I mean, that's something that between you and your partner have to solve in a way that at the end of the day, you don't have any emotional attachments to that person. I mean, financial and business is one thing and interpersonal relationships is another. It depends on the circumstances.
So you're saying to separate monetary from emotion, and beyond that, if you do have some sort of obligation like that, the best thing to do is to teach them, the other, how to handle that obligation themselves.
I mean, if you can, definitely. But first of all, you have to separate that emotion from financial obligations. That's that's in any kind of relationship. You should never interfere with those two things together, because it just ends up being messy. And yeah, if you do care about the person to the point that you're worried of how they will end up, let's say they're going to be evicted, and if it's not for you or something, then they're screwed, you know. In that case, you either find out a financial plan to help that person, or you say, hey, like, well, then find somewhere to live, or you help that person however you can, and if you care for it, if not, then just fuck it, just leave, you know. It's not your problem.
It feels a lot like do what you want, right? If you, I keep doing the push it up. If you don't want to be held responsible for something, then don't make yourself not responsible for it, right?
Well, then that's a moral question. You know, what should you be responsible for?
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, that's a lot, but ultimately, I think just as a rule on its own, it's just what you as the individual want. Whatever you hold valuable, you pursue it. Whatever you don't, cut it off.
I see. This goes into what Chris talked about a few podcasts back with, you know, figure out your personal goal, align yourself to your goals and your objectives, do what you want.
Tying this down with mental prisons, really do what you want is getting out of that. Basically, you are set a standard as to what you have to do, and if you don't feel like doing it, I mean, you always have the option of opting out or going about it whichever way you want to go about it. It's not really um, like, for instance, I mean, Chris, he said about a relationship, right? And um, me, for instance, as a woman, I've always had mental prisons on anything, you know, like the way you have to be, act, walk, um, be smart, and be an alcoholic at the same time. I don't know, shit like that. And, you know, it's like, screw them. I mean, if they tell me I can't do certain things, then, I mean, that's up to me, you know?
I think you put it well that society does put that stuff out there, and it applies to everyone, right? You find yourself in all types of situations, and if you don't like what somebody's telling you to do, you think about it, figure it out. If you don't want to do it, determine whether or not it's worth it, and then yeah, I think you put it really well.
Personally, I haven't really been in that many mental prisons. The one mental prison I was in was the mental prison of monogamy, which I can go into later. But I was going to ask Daniel, do you think that, like, are there some mental prisons that you've broken out of between the time that I knew you at Georgia Tech and now?
I'd have to think about what I was in at the time. I'm sure that there are some that I didn't even realize, right? That you find yourself in. Having, I think one is this idea that obviously having a job is important because you want to have a roof and a house, things like that. You want to be able to make money so you can provide for yourself. But the thing in Georgia Tech, or at least at college, the heavy importance on getting that immediate job and then focusing solely on your career right after. There was this implied air of, if you don't, what are you doing here? Or if you do, that should be the main thing and your primary focus. And it was kind of overbearing, I think, to the point where if it was this do or die situation for me. If I didn't get the job, I was that's another L that I take. That's another failure, and it piles up. I think that frame of mind is something that I broke out of recently. This encouragement to make your career your primary focus. That would be the biggest one.
I think that that is definitely one that I broke out of, but I broke out of it in, I mean, you saw me break out of it. It was between freshman and sophomore year. It's kind of when I broke out of that mentality. But I just find that, I don't know, I didn't experience that many mental prisons. Again, the monogamy one was the only one that I was really like stuck on. And I find that people, depending on their cultural background and where they grow up, the mental prisons that they're under differ heavily. right? Like, I think Stephanie can probably comment on the difference in, because she lived in Mexico for a while, the difference in the mental prisons that she goes under versus people who live in the US.
It was pretty intense. I mean, really, there's just a lot. Like, you can't wear certain things because you'll be catcalled. I mean, catcalling is one of the biggest things a woman can go through on a day-to-day basis, or sexual harassment, or fear of someone kidnapping you, or extorting or something. Like, you can't be flashy. It is a third world country at the end of the day that relies heavily on on what's it called, on cartels and stuff. But not getting into that. As a woman, I mean, you definitely you can't be hoeing around, or you can't be better than men, because men for some reason have to be better. Like, even in the sense of playing soccer, you couldn't play soccer because fuck you, you were a girl. Like, it was really annoying growing up wanting to be able to play with the boys and I couldn't. Like, there's such a heavy misogynistic culture in Mexico that definitely blocks me from being able to do lots of things that in the US probably you could. There would be a girls soccer team, or you don't get called that easily because there's going to be a cop nearby, or I don't know, just for the sake of it not being like that here.
Do you think you carry that on you, like the place that you grow up in, or the things that you learn when you're in a certain place, location? Do you think that carries with you even if you get out of it?
I mean, definitely you learn to be a little bit more cautious of your surroundings. It does develop some street smart, because nowadays, if I ever go out, I'm always going to be aware of who's serving my drink, for instance. Or, I mean, I don't drink anymore, but like, just to save the scenario. Or even if I'm walking alone at night, make sure my surroundings always have something sharp with me. Like, those are the things that I've carried with me, no matter where it is that I'm going. Definitely. You become a little bit more secure. Even meeting Chris, I mean, I went to his house. I was just telling him the other day that I had to tell my best friend, like, what is his location, who is he, like, what does he look like, what am I doing, what time am I arriving, what time I'm leaving, etc., etc. And you just take these precautions from nowadays. Now, if you're going to tell me, hey, if you're going to ask me, hey, because of this, are you going to stop acting the way you are? No, hell no, I don't care. I mean, I went out the other night, and I'm no matter how much of a misogynistic country this is, I wore a bra and jeans, something that usually would be against societal norms of dress code.
Really? Wearing a bra is against dress code?
I mean, wearing only a bra and basically no top.
Oh.
So Chris says that he's never felt that breaking, right? Or being able to do something different or live something different. Do you think, a general question, is it better to recognize that you were in one and break out of it, or to never have been in one at all? I would say that the understanding that you were being held back and no longer are helps you see things in a different way, as opposed to just, oh, well, I've always been this way, or I've always lived however I wanted to live.
It's just like failing and succeeding. I mean, if you succeed the first time, you didn't really learn anything. If you fail, then you learn something. Same thing with mental prisons. I mean, if you recognize that you were in one and then snap out of it, you remember to never go back to it again. As for if you succeed the first time without even ever going through that problem or not recognizing the problem, that doesn't make you prone into not having that situation later on in life.
I think it's always better to realize that you are or were in a mental prison than to be ignorant to it. Because, like, for example, my family always taught me that, family's number one. You only have the family you've got. You got to get close to them. You got to be friends with them. You got to, respect them. And I would go to family get-togethers where I'd meet people, cousins and aunts and uncles that I've only seen, a half a dozen times in my life, and they're essentially strangers. But I have, my parents are telling me to get close to them and love them and respect them regardless. And it wasn't until a recent event where I realized how limited my family view was that came clear to me that I was in a mental prison, that I was restricting myself to thinking that, the family is what you're born with, not what you make it. And ever since I learned that, ever since I made a family with my friends, I've realized that I was in that mental prison and I had broken out of it. And oh, sorry, that's my laundry. And it just shows me that it's so important to realize when you're in a mental prison and to break out of them, because then you have that much more freedom.
I like that idea that you bring up, the ability to extend similar love, the love that's expected of you, and love and respect that's expected of you to extend to the rest of your family, but to people who you decide. So that difference between the expected mindset that you have when you're born. Okay, here's your family, get along, love them, respect them. They're gonna be here for you. You're gonna be here for them. Or it could be drastically different for somebody else in a different family, but for you, and then you recognizing it and then saying, well, hey, well, why do I have to do that for these people, but also why not for these other people? And you can make this mental decision, well, that's a good type of love and respect, let me go and use that for something that I feel I should use this for, right?
Yeah, and that's a very crude way of putting it, but yes, objectively, it is choosing who you love and respect. But the most important point is not letting yourself be limited, like limiting those emotions. People tend to think I'm only going to really love the person I love the most is going to be, my wife or my husband, and that's it.
I also think there's a difference here between all of this treatment. I mean, I have great examples with my family. We're very united, but that took a lot of time and different scenarios in our different scenarios that we've been through. A lot of um, hypocrisy and lies and behind each other's back and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you respect your family just out of the respect of them being it. Now, definitely there might be one or two, maybe five people that you dislike because of a certain way of being or a certain way of treating you. But that's the other thing. Treatment is also very important. Like for instance, my grandfather, like he can be a piece of shit because he basically was the one to break up the family. Like he was the one who abandoned everyone, who really wasn't there. But yet, for some reason, every time he's in town, my family glorifies him, and it's like, oh, here's your grandfather, you love him, and give him kisses. And I'm like, ew, who is this old man I've seen probably 3 times in my whole life that basically is a piece of shit of man? Um, but you don't you treat them as with respect because it's still your grandfather, and well, you're not gonna be a cunt to them. Now if that person does something to you specifically that affects you, and in this case, like, I don't know, let's say your dad hits you, or your dad, you get into a really bad altercation financially or something, or something like that, then okay, you keep your distance. But if it's just because you don't like the person, I mean, I think there's something else to go about it with.
Mm-hmm. It feels like challenging those just because reasons, right? Just because they're my grandfather, I need to do all this, and without having any good reason that follows it, or just because they're a family, or just because anything really that doesn't have any good reason behind it, and we're expected to listen and say, oh yeah, well, obviously just because they are, or just because this is.
There's an important distinction to make between questioning and rejecting. It's important to question pretty much everything that society lays upon you and your family puts on your shoulders, but it's up to you to weigh either side of it and determine whether to reject it.
I think that's definitely an important thing to do, is questioning things. And I think that in the issue of family, right? when it comes to respecting a member of your family that is maybe a dickhead, you know, or like I have a uncle of mine. He is the most misogynistic piece of human garbage on the planet, but he's also never done anything wrong to me whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. So even though I don't agree with his morality as a human being, and he's not necessarily the nicest guy to most people, I still treat him with respect and dignity. Partly out of the fact that I was raised to do that to my family members. However, I also have some family members that I treat with pretty much indifference. Like, I don't talk to them, we don't catch up. Like, if I see them at a family party, it's just like, hey, how have you been? Good. You? This conversation finished, and I just move along because I don't really have any interest in them, right? I think it's important that people realize that you don't need to, you know, invest yourself in somebody's life. I think there's a difference between treating someone with respect and then genuinely investing yourself in their life and their future, right? Like Adam, I've genuinely invested my time and my future into you, not in a unbound way, right? If you split off, I'm going to keep going in my path, but in a way where hopefully, you know, in the future we end up being Busas together and, you know, building something as a unit. Whereas with a lot of my family members, some of them I do invest in for the future. Like Mikey right now, I've been helping him work out and helping him stop drinking and stuff like that. But then other family members, I'm just like, hey, how are you? Oh, you know, haven't seen you in a while. Cool. And then I just move on, right? But I still treat them with respect. And I think that's a key difference.
You need to see who are the people close to you and will do things for you, and then call them your family at the end of the day. The support and feeling of being united to something or to pack, you know, instinctively, it's something that we just all want. And sometimes your family, your actual biological family, can't provide that to you. But help in a partner and some friends or whomever your therapist even can be that person that makes you feel like you're not alone or you're okay. But I feel like that's off topic anyways. I feel like you can always count on these people so you can be your own person and ground yourself into being and doing the best you can in your life, you know. And if they're not helping you grow into being a better person, then you should reevaluate who you're with.
So let's talk about ways to help yourself out of mental prisons.
All right. So for me, the most important thing is whenever I face a decision, first of all, pros and cons of all the major decisions I see in front of me, but I also ask myself why, and I also ask myself why not, right? Now, if you just ask yourself why not, it can be dangerous in situations like, well, the mental prisons affect your decision making, right? And for me, the way to break out of certain mental prisons, like for example, let's say you meet a girl, Adam, right? We'll call her Stacy. And then you and Stacy start hanging out, like kind of like you're dating, but you're not really dating. You do a bunch of boyfriend girlfriend kind of stuff together. You know, let's say you have sex, it's all like super emotional and stuff. But then you don't actually date, and you never put any like points of exclusivity on there, right? If you are in the mindset of monogamy, so let's say you're not talking to any other girls while you're talking to Stacy, right? And then you stop and you ask yourself, okay, I'm going to ask Stacy to be my girlfriend. You might then ask yourself, why am I going to ask her to be my girlfriend? And then you might also ask yourself, why not? Why wouldn't I ask her to be my girlfriend, right? And in the why wouldn't tree, you might be able to see that, hey, maybe this relationship that we have right now is sustainable without needing to label it boyfriend girlfriend, without having to put some expectation onto each other, and we can just keep enjoying each other's company, right? But you can only arrive at that if you ask yourself the why and the why not of a specific action. I'm not saying that that's the only way, but I'm saying that's something that's helped me.
Is being in a relationship, aka boyfriend girlfriend, is that the mental prison?
Yes, the mental prison is that if you're doing intimate things with another human being, right? That it's not necessarily just boyfriend girlfriend, right? Because it could be boyfriend boyfriend, girlfriend girlfriend, whatever, right? But that when you get to a level of intimacy with someone, that you kind of have to get into a relationship with them, out of, let's say, respect for the other person, or to set boundaries, or so that you're both monogamous, or whatever the case may be. But it's definitely a mental prison that a lot of people undergo, because a lot of people, they start off like friends with benefits, and they have a great relationship, and then they get into a relationship, and then the relationship falls apart because of these new expectations that just get placed onto them, right? Whereas before, when they started out in the friends with benefits stage for a couple months, everything's totally fine, it's super relaxed, and then when they get into the relationship, the new expectations kind of mess things up, right? And it's the mental prison of like, oh, we've been seeing each other for a couple months, we should just start dating, blah 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 blah, right?
I think something I want to add is that maybe touching on how we break out of it is where we start with that. Like you said, it is important with decision making to ask why and why not, and that helps us address the prison. But it's called a mental prison because we're being held or kept there by others, and then we carry that on our own. And when we come to the decision making process and we ask why or why not, we've kind of already addressed that there is something there for us to ask a question about. Really, I think we get caught in these things or trapped in them out of just a mistake of our, not of our own volition, but of our own ignorance of the prison, that we don't realize we're in it. And because we don't realize we're in it, we never make a decision, or we don't give thought to the decision at all, and we gloss over it like it never happened. Just, oh, that's natural, of course I'm going to do that. And it takes that one moment of discord, or maybe a disastrously impactful moment where you go, oh my god, hell no, and then you start to think about it, or you reject it entirely, or some quiet moment of discord where you think, well, I'd rather not exactly do that, even if I'm expected to. And then you can start to address it. And I think that's when you start asking why and why not.
So you can determine if you're in a mental prison based off of your want and need. If you feel that something you're deciding and something you're thinking about is not what you want, or doesn't, or is questioning your inhibition and emotion, then that's when you should in turn question your decisions, and then if you're questioning a decision, you might be in a mental prison because of an obligation or because of an expectation.
Yes, I think the way that we come to do that is by trying to be more aware, or listen for those small things where we disagree. And when we disagree with something we're doing, we have to, that's when the alarm goes off, and you need to ask, why do I not feel right? Why am I doing it even if I don't want to? And if you know the reasons, okay, good. And you can think about them, and you can analyze them, and you can come to a determination whether or not it's right for you to do, or something that you want to do. But if you let it go by, you let that one moment of, oh, well, I don't really want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways, and it's gone, and you don't think about it, there's a chance that you are stuck in one.
I think that this actually goes with cognitive dissonance. That's actually exactly what you were just surmising, was that in cognitive dissonance, it's when the way you feel about something and your actions don't match up. And so that disconnect causes dissonance. And so either A, you change the way you think about it, or B, you change your action, right? And so I think breaking out of your mental prisons is exactly what you just said. In those situations, you do not feel particularly good about doing a specific action, is to think about the reasons why. I think you put that very well.
So what changes a mental prison from... Hold on. I'm not exactly sure what I want to ask you. I was gonna ask what changes a mental prison from a real prison, right? Because generally, it's a lot of mental prisons that we think about are standards that are being held against us by other people. It's not things that we place on ourselves. It's things that we've come to place on ourselves out of standards or expectations from others, or from ways that we thought, oh, well, I should do this all the time. We can place ourselves into them. I should do this all the time, and then not question it. Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going with this. It was something that I felt I wanted to talk about.
I feel like the mental prison to prison, really, a mental prison is something, an anxiety or like an action that happened or some kind of standard that blocks you from doing something that you want to do, like what you really want to do. That's your decision is based upon that, and like we were talking about. Now, mental prisons are what either an external force or something that you don't want that you want to do. Now, when it becomes an actual prison, I mean, let me put this in the best example of the relationship, right? I was in a highly toxic relationship where I had these mental prisons of not being able to go out if it weren't without asking him first, or I can't dress in a certain way, or I can't do something without his permission per se, right? Now, me not allowing this to take over me, I'm like, fuck you, I can do whatever I want to do, like if I want to go out, I'll go out. And what becomes a prison is when that person now starts acting upon that and taking it by force, that you can't do what you want to do, when someone takes that freedom away from you, if I may say.
Right.
At least in my case, for what I would say the difference between when you go in from mental prison to an actual prison.
It's being actually restrained from doing the thing that you want to do, right? In a prison, the door is actually locked. In a mental prison, you just don't ever try. You're in a cell and you never try to open that door. But if you're actually being restrained or punished for your action, that like you said, it's the difference between not physically being able to do that or being met with repercussions for doing it versus just never attempting to do it because you've been told not to do it.
Let me add on to that though, because also the prison can also be incurred by yourself. I mean, let's say you're in the mental prison of that you have to work 9 to 5 in an office job because to sustain yourself, whatever, right? And you go so much into that psychology that you need to work to sustain, but you never work to fulfill yourself, or you never work to be better self or better position than what you are in. You just you've just stuck in, oh, I need to do this just for this, without really getting anywhere. And then 10 years, 15 years go on by the line, and all the opportunities that you had ceased to take before are now haunting you because you're stuck in this actual prison that you put yourself in. So it can go both ways, really. I mean, it can be forced upon you by an external force, by an external person. In the case of a relationship, and let's say an abusive one can literally hold you down, pin you down, and tell you not to go. And then another one would be one that you created for yourself, which you find yourself difficult to getting out of. I mean, definitely there are ways. Maybe my example wasn't the best, but there sometimes, I don't know.
What are some ways to break out of these real prisons? Like, obviously not things that are impossible, but like, what are some tips to help yourself change? Let's say, for instance, like, how did you get out of this this abusive relationship with your ex?
Very important. First of all, you have to realize what situation you're in. A lot of these women, because I mean, for the most part, women are the ones in the victim side, although it can go both ways. When the victim finds itself blaming him or herself for the situation that they're in, they're not going to get anywhere. They have to, one of those commandments, nothing is 100% your fault. You have to first realize that, and then from there go on. It depends on the situation. In my case, I did find myself going back regardless of how abusive the situation was. I did know how bad the situation was, but for some reason, I don't know, it was either because of I was afraid, or because I don't know if he was going to do something to me, either legally or I don't know, emotionally. He can screw with whatever. Like, I don't know. I was going through so many what ifs that finally I at the end was like, you know what? None of this can hurt me. None of this. I need to find solutions for those what ifs. And from there, like, just suck it up and try to go forward, because that shit was really intense. But definitely first step is into recognizing that you're not in a good situation, and then trying to pinpoint what it is that you can work on and what things you can't, and if you can, and not to use can't, but things that are difficult for you to work on. What's it called? So always ask for help. I did get a lot of help from my friends and family, that's for sure. I couldn't have done it without them. It is very important to seek help when it gets to that point of you feeling overwhelmed or like you can't go through it. Listening to other people's perspectives and their advice, definitely not necessarily do you have to stick to that exact advice, but take it into consideration. And then also just the severity of it, like how much do you value the yourself, and how much do you how afraid of you, or not afraid, but how much are you willing to risk, um, I really didn't want to risk anymore in this relationship, and so I was like, I had to put an end to it somehow.
I want to say thank you, Stephanie, for first of all, when you were talking about the abusive relationships, I'm very happy that you mentioned that it can go both ways instead of just saying that it could go one way. And thank you for sharing these personal details. And thank you for the little commandment tidbit. My heart melted. But what I want to throw in about physical prisons is that some people are blocked by finances mainly. Like, I think the number one thing is if you become financially independent completely, then you have no physical prison anymore compared to when you're under someone else's wing, right? So I think that if you focus on finding a way to make your livelihood, then you'll be able to break out of most of the physical prisons, because nobody can really tell you what to do. You know what I mean? Let's say I just give you $10 million right now, Adam. Nobody can tell you what to do. Like, you're just going to do your own thing. There's not a single human being on this planet that's going to be like, hey, you have to do this and you have to follow it. Except obviously, there's the laws. And if you break the law, there's that whole thing. But aside from the general structure of society, like, no other human being can just walk up to you. If you take a job and your boss is being, a cunt to you, you can just be like, all right, I quit, goodbye, right? Because you don't need the job, you don't need the money, right? It's the situation where you're the most free, because there's nothing that you need or you require from other people. And then quick side note for anybody that ends up listening to this, I actually went to prison for a while, well, jail, for 13 days consecutively, and it sucks. So I'm gonna just, when you wake up in the morning or something bad's happening to you in your life, just think to yourself, at least I'm not in prison. Because holy crap, when you get your physical freedom taken away from you, it's terrible, right? So once you, especially if you're already mentally free, if you're mentally free and then you get your physical freedom taken away from you, it's real bad. So just be careful, take care, really pay attention to how your actions can have consequences, and that certain things, like people, I see them all the time, they smoke and they drive and they don't really give a shit, because they don't think like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, I'm invincible. Or they drink and drive and they're like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, I'm the exception. Well, that's not how statistics work, unfortunately. So just take care, people.
I really like so most I think half my questions this time came from just the name of the point, mental prison, right? And I like how when you discuss freedom and financial freedom, it is related to the way that it was worded, mental prison versus the freedom or the independence that you get, the obligation and dependence on other people versus the independence you can express when you have financial freedom or financial independence. I like that the solutions that we were talking about have names to them that seem like they would be solutions to the problem that we presented.
Well, can you list a few of them?
Yeah, so financial freedom and financial independence is, I think, one of the ways that leads to freedom in many cases, because a lot of us, one of the major things, like I talked about earlier, is the necessity for a career and the external and internal pressures that we feel to get a job, work well, get money, and never need for anything, or to have more money and to have more things. But at some point, if I, like you said, like Chris said, if I got $10 million right now, my life drastically changes. considerably.
There's also a point to make for, let's say, for an example, artists. I have a lot of artist friends who they don't particularly care about being wealthy. They just want enough money to live and pursue their art. They want a job that they can pursue their art in. Like, I have a friend, I'm not gonna name him because I haven't asked if I can name him, but he is a designer and he doesn't care about being rich. He just cares about doing his work. He holds on to his job even if he doesn't like certain parts of it because his job allows him to do his work.
Well, financial freedom is different, and then you can have all the money in the world, but still have those mental prisons, like your self worth. First of all, like you can have a shit ton of money, but if you don't love yourself, or if you don't think highly of yourself, or I don't know, if you haven't fulfilled some kind of emotional or some ambitious dream of yours, then you're gonna feel empty regardless, and that's gonna take away from your day-to-day life.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Having a dream, setting your goals.
Yeah, that was the last thing I wanted to touch on.
Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Stephanie, for being our guest.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Great work, guys.
Hey, thanks, Chris.
Hey, I love you, Tufts. And fuck you, Craig.
Fuck you, Craig.
Yeah, fuck Craig.
Fuck you, Craig.